Hi, this is Steve Pedrachik for Seattle Avionics. I'm here to tell you all about the brand new FlyQ EFB version 4.0. Probably the best way to describe it is with three simple words. It is our largest update ever. By far, not even close. This update has taken quite a while to do, but we think the results are going to be worth it. Let me explain why. The main thing is that we've spent extensive time focusing on post-flight analysis. We announced this as a whole new category of product late last year, and now it's coming to fruition. Here are what the four different elements of post-flight analysis mean to us. Number one, it means adding a visual logbook that goes way beyond what a standard logbook is. I'll explain to you by showing you, as would be appropriate since it's called visual logbook, what the visual element of the visual logbook means. It goes way beyond any logbook that you've seen before. Number two, post-flight analysis has a lot to do with being able to evaluate your performance visually, graphically. So it includes visual playback in both 2D, 3D, split screen, whatever you like, and the ability to look at very detailed performance graphs so you can analyze your flight based on time. It also includes something very unique that we call the Floq Network. It's a way to link you and your friends together so that optionally, if you like, you can take a look at the flights that they take, they can take a look at your flights, you can actually play them back, and you can analyze them, you can talk about them, and so on. There's quite a lot here. It also means adding a lot of features that help CFIs and student pilots connect. This, of course, uses the Floq Network, and it's a way that, for example, CFIs can give endorsements remotely to their student pilots. A lot of other benefits to CFIs and students, too. Not only that obviously is most of the product, but we spent quite a bit of time fixing other bugs and making performance improvements across the board. The first thing you'll probably notice is on the tab bar down the bottom, there's a new tab. It says Flights. It's the third from the left. On the iPhone, it's in the same place. By the way, if you have an iPhone, though, you can rearrange the tabs if you like, which is very handy. That doesn't apply to the iPad. Also, if you take a look at the top of the screen, where the search box, the lock button, downloads, all that kind of thing are, there's also a new button that looks like a bell at the far right side of that bar. When you tap on the bell, it will give you various notifications about things like people following you, accepting or declining, but it will also give you things like when new chart data is available, when new versions of the app are available, lots of other things. So that bell icon will be lit up if there's something new for the system to tell you. Now, but let's begin by taking a look at the logbook. So to do that, you simply tap on the Flights tab down at the bottom. By default, the system usually comes up in the Flight Following tab. There are two tabs at the top, one that says Flight Following and one that says My Flights. Flight Following has more to do with the Floq Network, so we'll talk about that a little bit later. But if you're not following any other users, Flight Following and My Flights are actually the same, so it doesn't really matter. At any rate, you take a look at the two tabs. Right now we're on the one labeled My Flights. My Flights you can think of very strictly as your logbook. It's just about you, not anyone else. So let's take a look at what you see here. It's not strictly speaking just a logbook in terms of keeping track of your flights. Like in this case, it keeps track of an endorsement. I have logbook entries that I may have typed in manually, so as the graphic would indicate, there's no track to it, as opposed to this flight over here, which was recorded by FlyQ's built-in data recorder and automatically record the flight so that we have a track for it, and so on, more like that. A couple more flights, and so on. Now, if you don't like the layout here, in terms of if you think that there's a lot of space being wasted perhaps by the graphic, not a big deal. Towards the top of the screen, on the upper right side, there's a button that looks like a list. It's currently white, meaning we're not in list view. If you tap it, it goes into what we call the list view. It's a much more compact view, much more like what you'd see on, say, Navlog. Now, I'm going to go back to the more visual view, though. One of the other things that you'll notice is at the very top, even in fact above the list of the individual flights, but below the Flight Following and the My Flights area, is a section that gives you various statistics. It tells you that I have 132 flights, my total duration is about 138 hours, distance about 200 miles, and that gives you statistics on the number of night flights, 14, and the number of hours, 12.2, number of flights in instrument conditions, and PIC, and so on. So you see a lot of statistics very quickly without even running a basic report. It just shows that to you right away. Pretty nice. Let's talk about a little bit of filtering now. For example, if I was interested in looking at all my flights from not all time, but maybe just in the last 90 days, There's a big search box towards the top of that, search friends, airports, and so on. On the right side of that is a picker that lets you pick time. So I could say, only show me the flights within, say, the last 90 days. Notice that we've been very busy creating the app, so I haven't had a lot of time to fly in the last 90 days. Only 8 flights during that time period. You tap that, and you can set that back to all time. Now let's say, though, they want to take a look at a particular flight. In addition to doing that time filtering, if there was a particular airport that I flew to and I don't quite remember anything about it, but I want to take a look at the flight again, I can type things like the airport ident, like RNT, which is for Renton. By the way, you can type it with a K if you want to, or without a K. You clearly see in the statistics it found one flight, so here's that flight. If there's another airport that you are interested in, maybe PAE, my home airport, Payne, you see some flights there. Oh, for example, that looks like an interesting flight. This flight was on July 12th, and it shows you some basic statistics about the flight. In addition to the graphic, you see that's 153 miles, and the duration was about 1 hour 40 minutes. So pretty straightforward. Now, on this flight or with any other flight, if you want to see more details, basically just tap almost anywhere within that area, within that cell, and it shows you a graphical, resizable map. The green is where you take off from, the red is where you land. So it looks like I took off from one runway and I landed on another runway. Pretty common actually at Paynefield. In terms of standard logbook things though, the standard logbook entries are in the data column. So here is where you put things like aircraft identifier, what type of plane, you can put remarks in there, duration, all that kind of stuff. Now the flight recorder, like in this case, will automatically pre-fill most of that for you, but it does allow you to change it. So if the flight recorder says 1 hour, 1.5, but you said, well, some of that was really on the ground, so let's count that as 1.4. You can overtype that if you want to. You can enter hobs and so on. In this particular case, this is a flight that I made, so of course I have the edit button in the upper right corner, and I can go in and I can change things. So I can type in, for example, my hobs time, or I could do something like, say, night time was 0.3, whatever you want to do. And then you can hit the save button right there. Okay. The edit button is obviously not available if you were to look at somebody else's flight, and we'll get into that later. So that's how you do all the standard entries that you'd have in a logbook. In addition to having flights automatically recorded for you by the built-in data recorder, let me clear this filter, by the way. You can also hit the plus button on the far right corner and manually make a logbook entry. So if you want to, you can just type in whatever you like in terms of the data columns, the same as you would in most other logbook programs. I also want to show you a couple of other features to do with the logbook. So notice that in this particular flight here, on the graphic there, it also says +1 photo. What does that mean? That means that when you tap on this, there's a photo tab. So you get the map tab, you get the data tab, and then you get the photos tab. And there's a photo that you can add whatever photo you want from a flight and so on. Of course, if you tap on it, you see it nice and big. You can look at it. You can hit the action button and share it, delete it, email it, whatever you want to do. Now you can also add other photos too. For example, if you want to do that, you just hit that action button. And notice that there's a lot of items on here. Share the image, which means to Facebook or Twitter or something like that, or print it. You have email and print and so on. I'll pick this choice, add photo. That pops open the standard photo browser on your iPad. And I'll select a photo here. Maybe that was also during that flight. So let's see what I can find. Okay, let's say maybe it's that photo. Great, and there's that photo. Also, I should point out that if you choose to share your flights with other people, which is something that the Floq Network does, and we'll talk about a little bit later, it's possible to take any specific flight and mark it as private. You see the switch on the right-hand side of the screen. Right now it's off. Simply turn it to on, and regardless of your privacy settings, that particular flight will never be shown to anyone but you. Okay, so that's kind of the basics on how you get data into the system using the iPad. I'm not going to show it, but you can also import, if you have log files from MyFlightBook or from ForeFlight or potentially in the future other systems, you can go to our web-based system, which is called FlyQ Online, just flyq.seattleavionics.com from any PC or any Mac. And within the settings feature there's a whole section that lets you import log files created by these other applications. So for example, if you have 5-10 years worth of log files and you store it electronically in another format, in about 10 seconds you can import all of those directly into FlyQ EFB. It's very slick. So let's talk about reporting though. Once you put the data into the system, you typically want to get something out from it. Well, the stuff at the top that tells you flights 132, duration 136, when you combine that with the filtering and the time, you actually have quite a bit of information without even running a report. So, I mean, as I said, you can do things like, show me data for the last 90 days. Boom. I know that I have 8 flights, 2.8 hours, my night time, my instrument time, and so on is all right there. So without even running a report, you can get a lot of information. You can also filter that information by type of aircraft, by tail number. So for example, if I wanted only time in 172, I can type C172. And as you can see, those 8 flights drop down to 5. Okay, just hit the X button to clear it, and so on. But let's talk about running the more standard reports. You can get to the reports immediately from the Flights tab. You see on the top you have My Profile, Friends, and Reports. It reports. You have 2 different types of reports. You have text-based reports, essentially PDF documents, and then you have graphs, which are pie charts and pie charts and bar graphs. So let's go with some of the standard ones. So on the text, I can do things like show me monthly activity. It takes it a moment to load the file. And here it comes. So you know how many flights and how many hours you took in each month. It's very simple, very straightforward. You can hit the action button in the right corner and email or print it, and so on. You can also do things that are a little bit more advanced. Like if you want to print out all of your logbook in something that really looks like a logbook, you can hit Logbook Details. If you have an extremely large logbook, like say several hundred entries in it, this may take a little bit of time to produce. But generally speaking, it will take about maybe 20 seconds or so to generate. Okay, so now you see the logbook comes up, and here you are. The logbook is a pretty standard format, although it's very compact, very easy to use. It gives you how many flights, it works on a per page basis, carry forwards, and so on. It gives you a spot to type in, rather put your signature, endorsements and comments are listed there. So very, very straightforward. You can hit the action button and email it or print it, of course, and so on. Of course, it's very handy if you also use a time filtering or something else. If you have a very, very long logbook, it might be useful to say, well, only in the last year or something like that. So very easy to do. Let's talk about the graphs. So on the graphs, though, again, you just hit that graph tab over there, and you can do things like show me monthly activity, but now the monthly activity is in the form of a line graph, not in terms of a text-based system. So it looks more like that. So it looks like in September I had a lot of flights, or actually my number of hours, which is the blue line, was very large. The total number of flights, the green bar, is not necessarily huge. Looks like I was flying more about this time last year, although you can see that as time has picked up in the summertime, I'm flying a little bit more now. So it's one way of doing it, and again, you can print it and so on. Some of the other graphs on there are pretty nice. For example, if you want to see which airports you go to most often, you can go to the top airports as either a bar graph like this. So it shows you the most popular one. It only lists the top 10, by the way. So another way to look at that one would be top airports as a pie chart. So you tap on that. Same basic data going into it, but it's represented as a pie chart, not as a bar graph. You can zoom in, see what your most common airport is, which really the single biggest category is other, but it's all there. And when you take a look at that, you can hit the action button, and in addition to email and printing it, you can do something like share an image. Like if you want to publish that to, say, Facebook, you can do that. And there it is. And you can even publish this, by the way, to specific groups in Facebook. So you could say things like, if I want to put this on the group for flights above the Pacific Northwest, I hit the share button, and boom, it's shared. In fact, if I go to Facebook, you'll find that there it is, right there. I just posted that graphic a moment ago. Okay, so back to FlyQ. The other part to the post-flight analysis, one of the other parts to post-flight analysis, is the ability to look at things from a very, very visual perspective. So a couple ways to do that. One is to use what we call the heat map. So let me reset my filters here a little bit. So instead of last 90 days, I will set this to all time. So now I'm looking at 132 flights. Now, if I want to see where these are graphically on a map, so in the upper right-hand corner, there's an icon that is called the place mark icon, or in this case, kind of put stuff on the map icon. It's blue. I tap on that, and now you see all the airports that you've flown to during that time period. They're color-coded, green good, red bad. So the single most common airport that I've flown to, this is actually based on some imported logbooks, is this airport here. It's green, so it's KEXX. There's only one of those, so this shows you instantly where your most common airport is. Then oranges and yellows are below that, and ones that you've only flown to a couple of times are in red. As you zoom out though, notice what happens. So right now you can see the individual airports. As you zoom the map out, it turns into colored regional balls. This is what we kind of mean by heat map. So for example, let's go maybe someplace a little bit closer to home. So if I take a look at this, as I zoom into the Seattle area, I begin to see airports, for example, Renton or SeaTac or S43, Harvey Field, and so on. Now, where this is kind of cool is if you want to know more about the flights that you took to S43. So again, there are two of them listed here. If I simply tap on that airport icon here, it immediately goes back to my flights list, but it shows me only the 2 flights that had something to do with S43, either as takeoff or as landing. It doesn't really matter. So that's a very, very easy way to graphically find where you've flown and to then look in more detail at the flights from those areas. Also notice on the Flights tab, there's a play button. That's a blue triangle shape there. If I tap on that, then what happens is the system, I'm going to, by the way, go in and turn off what we call the logbook layer, which is the heat map layer. And now we are watching detailed playback of that flight. You can control the playback in a couple of different ways. So now we're looking at it in a 2D view. You can also see it in 3D by hitting the cube icon, like that. Then tap the cube button twice more, and you get back to the you get back to the 2D view, like that. Okay, but that's on 2D and 3D. For that matter, though, you can hit the split screen button in the upper left corner of the screen, and why not? You can display it both in 2D and 3D at the same time, and FlyQ has always had a built-in simulator. So if you tap any of the 5 buttons in the upper right corner, what we call the status area, think of it as one gigantic button. You have a series of tabs like weather information and ADS-B and flight recorder, but the GPS also doubles as turning the simulator on. So I can move anywhere, I can scrub my position to anywhere in the flight just by moving this little slider. Very easy to do. Or I can even move the speed. The default is real time, but I can move that slider to as fast as I want. This is what we call the warp factor switch. So now we're moving at 10 times normal speed in both 2D and in 3D view. And again, can bring that to any spot in the flight. Like if you want to see what it was like a little bit before landing, you can do that as well. Or yes, there you go, just like that. So now we're moving along, and we should be coming in for landing, looks like in a few minutes. All the time that you do this, by the way, take a look at the gauges on the top bar. They show you what your actual altitude was, your ground speed, your track, and so on and so forth. So this really is like playing back the flight in a very, very simple, very easy to understand way. Another way to analyze your flight, though, I'm just going to go back to my Flights tab on this side of the screen and pick a particular flight. So again, this is the one that we were looking at before. So if I tap on that, of course I can look at it this way, but there's also an analysis tab. Let's actually simply go back to single screen. So on the analysis tab, so every flight has, the basic map in it, shows you where you flew. It has the data entry fields that you'd expect, has all your photos if you add a photo, and then it has analysis. The analysis tab has 3 graphs in it at the moment. There'll be more later when we begin to import engine analysis data from other systems. But if you tap on one of those, it shows you a very detailed graph. There's the green area represents your altitude in feet, and then the blue area talks about your ground speed. That's the blue line. So as you can see that your speed is changing as you're going up. Your speed decreases, not a real shocker there. And you see what it's like over time. You can imagine what this will be like also, not just with things like altitude and speed and so on in time, but have other factors such as engine temperature, such as exhaust gas temperature, such as altimeter readings. I mean, it's all kinds of things that we can do in this once we begin importing data from other systems, and you'll see that very soon. So that's the analysis system. You have 3 graphs that come up automatically. You don't have to hit an analysis button. You don't have to do anything. You simply pull up any flight and move to the analysis tab. Very simple. Okay, let's go back to flights. So far, everything we've talked about is in the guise of the visual logbook and the visual playback and analysis. I said that there were 4 parts to do with post-flight planning. The third part is what we call the Floq, F-L-O-Q. Get it? Floq Q as in FlyQ. FLOQ network. What the Floq network does is it allows you, and this is totally optional, this allows you and your friends to jointly agree that you'll allow each other to see each other's flights. Now, of course, this is with your bunch of buddies. This is terrific. If you're doing this with a flying group, it's very handy, especially if you share a same plane. If you are a CFI, being able to track what your students are doing is incredibly powerful to do. There's a lot of uses for this, corporate flight department, but for most of us, it's really just going to come down to just plain fun. That most of us fly either with other people or a lot of our friends are pilots, and this allows you to track them. So before we talk about that, though, let's talk a little bit about privacy, because that's been very, very important in the design of this. The main thing is, let's hit the profile button. It says My Profile. It's on the upper left side of the screen here. When I type My Profile, it pulls up the profile for me. So the first thing you see at the very top is a 3-segment switch. It goes public, semi-private, and private. The default setting is semi-private. What semi-private means is that your tracks will not be shared by anybody without your permission. It basically means that nobody will see your information, at least not most of the information about you, or your flying, or anything else about you, unless you specifically allow them access. People have to specifically ask for access, and you have to grant it to them. If you absolutely want to make sure that nobody ever sees anything about your flying, no problem. You switch that to private, like that. When it's on private, you can look at your flights on however many devices you have that you've logged into, but nobody else can look at them. Okay, they are private just to you. In fact, no one else will even see that you're in the system. Semi-private, though, as I said, does give a little bit of information about you out. It basically tells people that you exist. It gives your name. It tells people how many flights you've taken and what your home airport is. That is simply so that they can know that you're there and request to allow you to allow them to follow you. Okay, so we'll talk about adding friends in a second here, but the default setting in the application is semi-private. So your flight tracks, your flight plans, obviously credit card information, your address, none of that stuff is ever shared with anyone. Okay, so but the semi-private setting simply allows you to be asked to follow from other people. And if you want to use private, feel free to do that. Private simply means nobody will even know that you're in the system. The third choice, public, isn't something that most people would use. That's the ability to allow anybody, without even asking your permission, to follow you. Okay. So again, the default setting here is semi-private. Now, of course, if you want to do anything useful with the Floq network, you have to have people following your flights, or you have to follow them. That's kind of the whole point of the exercise. So to do that, next to the My Profile button at the top is a button that says Friends. Tap on Friends, and what the system does is it shows you 4 different tabs. The first tab shows you who you follow. So right now I'm following 2 different people. It also tells who is following me, John Rudder, not too surprisingly. It has a tab that shows me suggestions. I'm not going to use that right now, but the suggestions tab takes a look at people who are flying at your home airport or in your area, and if they're semi-private or public, it shows their names to you and you can request to follow them. Or what you can do is you can type in the name of somebody. So for example, I'm going to get out of flights here for a second and point out a couple of things. When I go to the flight following tab, notice that I move from, well, let's go back to this. On my flights, the default, I have 132 flights. If I were to tap flight following, there are suddenly 225 flights on the screen. Why is that? It's because I'm already following one person. You saw him listed earlier. It's my friend Jeff. So Jeff's flights are right here on the screen, intermixed with mine. So right now, there's one person that I'm following their flights. It's Jeff. If I want to add somebody else, I hit that Friends button, and I see them listed there. And another friend of mine is a guy named Mike. So his last name is this. So I type his name, hit search. If you know someone's email address or even their home airport, the search system will also find based on that. And again, If your settings are set to private, your name doesn't ever show up in any search list. Only if it's semi-private or private. So in this case, here's Mike. Typically, as I said, people would be set up so that their accounts are semi-private. You have to ask for them. Simply for the purpose of recording this video, Mike allowed me to set his account very temporarily to public. So there's a button on the right-hand side that says follow. Normally it would say ask to follow. And when it's asked to follow, he will get a message, both an email and a notification within FlyQ, saying, Steve Podrachik wants to follow your flights. Is that okay, yes or no? And unless he says yes, I never get to follow his flights. If you are set to public, though, you can just hit the follow button and immediately follow him. So remember, let's go back to our flights tab here. We previously had 225 flights where I was just following Jeff. The screen is blinking for a second, meaning it's refreshing itself with new data. So it's going to now take those 225 flights, which are mine and Jeff Mirsapazi's, and add Mike's flights onto them. So now we have 343 flights in the system, and here are some of Mike's. So now we have two people that we're following. We're following Jeff and we're following Mike. But say that for the moment I just want to take a look at some of the flights that Mike has taken. I can type Mike into the system right here. So I just type Mike. Right now it will only show me his flights. So let's see if we can find some that look interesting. That's not bad. That looks like a fun flight. Alright, so here's the flight that he made. So since he allowed me to follow him, I can hit the play button right here and it will download the track and it will show me what his flight was. And again, I can do that in 2D and in 3D by using split screen at the same time. And use the playback system to move things along a little bit, show the flight over water, whatever it may be. Okay, so that's the ability that you have by linking things together. Again, you can really see, you can begin to actually relive flights that your friends take by taking a look at them. It also makes it very easy, of course, if you have a photograph associated with the flight, you can see the photos of the flight. And you can imagine the possibilities if you're a student pilot or a CFI, that it's extremely helpful to do that. Okay, let's go back to single screen here. I'm going to turn the simulator off and go back to my flights menu very quickly and get rid of the filter. So now we have 343 flights total being taken between Jeff, between myself, and between Mike. And remember that heat map feature that shows you where people have flown. So if I tap that button in the upper right corner, it'll show me a much more elaborate map. So a lot of flights taken in this area. But be willing to bet an awful lot of flights taken in the Pacific Northwest too. So again, if we zoom in, we see things like PLU. So if I want to know who's flown to PLU, I tap on that. It looks like Jeff and Mike have both flown there recently. So this would be a great opportunity to, again, talking about kind of the social aspect of this. I can say something like, oh, maybe to Mike,